If they aren't able to learn and grow, they're going to have to move because the cost of living is crazy right now.
Welcome to Design Nerds Anonymous, the podcast that sparks curiosity at the intersection of business and design. I'm your host, Amanda Schneider, founder and president at ThinkLab, speaker on TED.com, and now author of Work for What's Next, published by Wiley. This season, we're unpacking the shifts shaping how work is actually getting done. And today, we're stepping into perhaps one of the most crucial as we build on last week's episode about trust. That's recruitment and retention. Now, it's easy to say loyalty is disappearing. It's harder to ask whether we've designed roles, cultures, and career paths that are worth staying for. My guests today bring two very different but quite complementary lenses. Grace Snelling covers branding, design, and cultural shifts at Fast Company, bringing a front row and Gen Z perspective to how work and identity intersect. She sees how companies present themselves and how that story lands with her peers and emerging talent. Megan Detratto is a partner and co-founder of TOKONEXT. She spent more than 2 decades guiding AEC firms specifically. That's architecture, engineering, and construction through recruitment, succession, and next-gen leadership. She's sat in the rooms where talent decisions are made and where they quietly unravel. What makes this conversation powerful is the tension between those perspectives. Lived experience paired with emerging expectations, filtered through the patterns that we're seeing in the built environment. Together, we explore whether less loyal is the right or wrong way to look at it, what transparency actually signals to candidates, and how leaders can design organizations people want to grow inside, not escape from. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Grace Snelling and Megan Detratto. I would love for you to give me one word to describe the future of recruitment, retention, maybe even this loyalty concept, if we kind of stay on the path that we're on today. So Megan, do you want to go first?
I'm Megan Detratto. I'm with TOKONEXT, and we are a consulting firm that focuses on people solutions in the design and building industries. So anything from organizational design, succession planning, talent acquisition, we help firms grow smarter, not harder. I think the next question that you asked was describe recruitment and retention or the future in one word.
A piece of cake, one word to describe all of that.
Oh, so easy. I think it's intentionality.
Oh, I love it.
Because action for action's sake or change for change's sake doesn't create a purpose-filled direction. And so without that, I think you just end up perpetually confused about what you're doing or why you're doing it or where you're going.
Grace, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Grace Snelling. I'm an editorial assistant at Fast Company, and I focus on writing in our design section. So a lot of stories about things like branding and product design. But I also sometimes write about how Gen Z is shaping the marketing world and how brands are speaking to Gen Z. And I'm a Gen Zer myself, so I'm just kind of seeing those trends as they play out with the people around me. So excited to bring the Gen Z perspective to this conversation. I unfortunately went in a less positive direction. I chose cynicism. That's kind of the energy that I feel from my peers in terms of the job market and job hunt right now. And I think there are a lot of forces at play to make it that way.
Can you give us an example of cynicism? What leads you to that word?
Yes, totally. I mean, I think you gave a great example in the book about how a lot of Gen Z job seekers are applying over and over again, even to a certain point. Like some people I know, they've applied to maybe hundreds of jobs and not even heard even a word back, sort of just feel like they're speaking into the void. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I'm hearing about recruitment right now is just this feeling that you're doing all of this work and not even getting any kind of response back. So I think that creates a lot of cynicism from the Gen Z perspective of just feeling unheard in terms of that job search.
While I don't necessarily want to push us to go negative, I actually love that we started there because I think that it really is an honest look at what's happening today. And you guys haven't read the whole book cover to cover, but it really starts with this idea that there's a growing trust gap. And even the fact that you started with cynicism, Grace, and kind of this sentiment that is really reflected in some of the stories and the chapters about recruitment, I think is maybe a call to action or a caution. If we continue on the path that we're on, what we're headed for is this growing disconnect, this growing fragmentation. And I think that we're at this beautiful moment that we could change that with some simple actions. And that's what I hope we discuss over the next 30 minutes here or so. So I'd love to dive into maybe one core idea from the two chapters. You guys read the chapter on recruitment and retention that aligns well with your work. And maybe there was something that was really exciting to you in these chapters. So Grace, maybe I'll start with you.
One idea that really interested me is when you were discussing sort of the recruitment and how companies should kind of almost pitch themselves to Gen Z employees. You mentioned that companies should come at this almost on a more personal level of like, what do they offer to the Gen Z employee, and try to avoid kind of corporate speak and like that bullet point energy, and instead aim for showing sort of what the morals and values of the company look like. And I thought that was a great point that really resonates with my coverage, just because I'm writing a lot about how Gen Z impacts branding and social media marketing and just what that looks like as a digitally native generation. And I think what we see is that Gen Z has just become really good at seeing through corporate speak and almost sick of the way that companies position themselves in that way. And so I think in order to stand out in the job market, companies need to be adopting a more frank and transparent tone in job listings. So I thought that was a great point. Another trend I've seen recently online in terms of what I was talking about with cynicism is I think a lot of people are really sick of, again, just hearing like nothing, getting ghosted by potential recruiters. And you mentioned using AI to follow up and just send a little note to any type of applicant to let them know like where their application is in the process, which I like that idea, but I also think Gen Z can be a little bit wary of AI and can tell when things are written by AI. And I saw a few posts go viral on LinkedIn recently about receiving a handwritten note from a recruiter, even if it's super brief, just saying, XYZ is what I liked about what you brought to the table. So sorry, it's not going to work this time, but would love to connect again in the future. And I think that makes a huge difference just as a generation that's used to that constant communication, to get even like a super short note directly from whoever you spoke to. So those are a couple things that stood out.
Megan, anything to add to that?
Backing up to the comment about cynicism, I don't think that that's just a Gen Z thing. I talk to people in all generations, and there is quite a bit of skepticism and cynicism in that, you know, older generation, even the boomers that are sunsetting out. I recently talked to somebody who is still leading a curated search, but was like, where does all this stuff go? Just like in the abyss? Like, I don't hear from anybody. So I'm hearing it across, you know, all generations of talent in the industry. And it is an issue.
If I could just jump in there, I think the difference is, you know, I'm a Gen Xer and I know what it was like before. And this doesn't feel normal. I think to these Gen Zers, it's like, this is all they've never, ever known. And it's like, what the hell? Like, this is the way it's going to be?
This dichotomy, right? Where you have the older generation who's like really missing that human connection and is highly skeptical of AI and is never sure. And you have the younger generations who are like, there's got to be more than this, and is also skeptical of AI. And plus, you just across the board, like, nobody wants to get a boilerplate generated response that still has like the parentheses with name in bold and caps. Like, I see that all the time. I'm like, come on, guys, we could do better than this. But I also think, you know, bouncing forward to what you were saying, Grace, about the intersectionality between marketing and some of those approaches to how you communicate the opportunity. As a consultant who's been leading search and really curated search for a long time, the thing that I always educate leaders on is, you know, your talent acquisition team is a PR extension of your organization. They should be telling your story. They should be putting that recruitment marketing out there as an extension of your organizational marketing tools and collateral, because that's the engagement ring. That's the way that you create this platform of a destination firm where people want to work there. It's how you educate people on what they'll be doing on a day-to-day basis, how they spend their time, right? Everybody knows that nothing really has changed in terms of generation to generation and how much the design and building industries folks spend at their desk in their work. We're a really hardworking, hours-driven professional services platform, right? So the work that you're doing, who you spend it with, and all that stuff really matters. So communicating that is really important in your marketing materials. If you can say what your differentiators are in your job description about not only the work that they're doing, the job that they're leading, but also about the firm that they're working for, that makes a huge difference. We do a ton of educating on that. And it's surprising how disconnected the talent acquisition or HR teams are from the marketing team. So we do a lot of stitching and zippering together. And I think more firms just need to know how to not put boilerplate stuff out.
Well, and that's so interesting because in chapter 2, we get into this a little bit about building trust. And we do an exercise. ThinkLab has run some exercises with actually office furniture dealers. And we ask them, all of their client-facing people, could be someone who is selling, could be someone who's in customer service for a call-in line. What are the 3 words that describe what makes your company truly unique? And then we put these into word clouds. So the more frequently that word is mentioned, the larger it is in the word cloud. And we put those word clouds on a wall. And when we have 12 of these dealers in a room, we ask them to pick their own word cloud out. And guess what? Most of the time, they can't do it. And I think that is a really tough realization for a lot of these companies to come to, because it's a big aha that, one, they're not aligned.
Yeah.
People are seeing different things. And I think that that's especially notable to Gen Z, who has this high bullshit-o-meter, right? They're really kind of reading through the lines, like Grace said.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to that point, I was looking back at actually Fast Company's coverage about sort of what leaders are doing to retain Gen Z, and just reading some anecdotes that founders and CEOs had shared. And I think one thing one leader pointed out that really rang true for me is that Gen Z very much grew up watching corporations make big promises about things like diversity, accounting for neurodiversity in the workplace, mental health, et cetera, and then watched companies just totally back off of those promises. And I mean, we've seen that become a huge trend this year. Like if you just think about Target, for example, which completely walked back its DEI commitments. And Gen Z, as you point out in the book, Amanda, is very value oriented in terms of how we tend to choose what workplace we want to work for. And so, yeah, I think not knowing what your company stands for, and especially making a promise about something as important as a DEI initiative and then walking back away from that, is really a red flag to any Gen Z applicant for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, one of the things, Amanda, you say in the retention chapter around loyalty is not dead and people stay where they grow. And there is people also stay where they feel seen and valued and where they find connection, right? We try to get ahead of, when I'm tethering this back to like, don't use the boilerplate job description in your recruitment marketing, is the "if I had known" statement is a really important one to watch out for, right? Sometimes you might catch the fish with your hook in the water that way, but if you do and you get lucky enough to, it's going to be really hard to retain that person, because they're going to get into your organization and they're going to start realizing like those holy shit Sherlock moments. Like, if I had known that this was what I was really going to be doing, I might not have accepted this job. Or if I had known that this is the reality around how you guys operate or what this company's values are. And I think that's where I see a lot of turnover, right? So when we sit with hiring managers or organizations, most hiring managers don't want to be crappy hiring managers. They're really good professionals. They're high performers that do their jobs really well. And when they do their jobs really well, they have the opportunity to grow and scale their teams and their businesses. but they don't know how to do that, right? And there's not a whole lot of organizations or programs in any scale of firm that are doing that effectively. And so we come back to the if I had known, right? How do you get ahead of that? And a lot of it just really comes back simply to what would you have wanted to know as a person stepping into this company or the seat that you're in? How do you speak with transparency in a way that's engaging but informative, right? Where it gives people the opportunity to say, man, I don't know if this is the right job for me. Because then that hiring manager can say, okay, cool. Well, you're still super talented, so maybe you belong over here. I think that's a huge missing. It's like in the periphery. It's like an adjacent thing that is the space of opportunity that people just don't have, they don't access enough or as frequently as they should. And I'm trying really hard to bring visibility there, but I think it's a big, again, it's a big piece to all of that. And it's so interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Can I add, this is totally an aside, but I'm actually so curious when you guys both mentioned, Amanda, you said a bit ago that you're seeing cynicism across generations and that it did not used to look like this, speaking into the abyss vibe. And I just graduated like a little over a year ago, so I actually have not known any other type of job market. What did it look like before for you guys? What are the big differences that you're seeing?
That's a great question. I mean, I've been doing this in some form or fashion for like 20 plus years. So when I first started out, even as a young person in talent acquisition, there was no digital world in which people could, on a massive scale, produce applications, right? So a lot of it really was like I would get people walking into my organization and asking to fill out a paper application, or I would be handed a stack of paper applications and have to sift through them, literally make phone calls and say, hey, Grace, I'm from so-and-so, I got your application, and do that type of exchange and make a decision, right? Now, fast forward going to some of the intentional exploration on the corporate side that I did, because this was something that I was really curious about. Some of the firms that I've worked for, it is really difficult because they're, especially for some of the younger, more entry-level positions, there are thousands of applications. And oftentimes there's only, a handful of people that are leading in a recruitment seat for that entire region, supporting 20, 40, 50 hiring managers. It literally becomes an abyss. So much so that particularly for federal contractors, there's compliance protocols that you have to follow in terms of how you review applications, hundreds of which never even get looked at. It is a true thing that you have to differentiate yourself, and it can feel really defeating because it is, right? So, I'll leave it there, but I think it really went from a very interactive personal experience to a really impersonal one very quickly. And I think everybody's feeling that. There's a lot of desire to change it, but in a digital world, how do you do that effectively, right?
Yeah, because I think that concept of just walking into a company and sitting down and talking to someone, that's almost become a meme in the modern era. It's like, that's what your mom suggests when you ask her.
I saw Grace giggle when you said that.
I think that's a common meme format of like, oh, my mom told me that I should just try calling the CEO and chatting with them. But that is real. Like, it feels almost impossible to have a conversation with someone who actually works at the company that you're applying for.
So it's really funny because I have, I'm a mom and I have a college age kid and a high school kid, and he's going through his little job search right now. And this is my wheelhouse. So I'm guiding. He's applying at our grocery store down the street. And we went into the customer service desk to talk to the store manager. And that person was like, oh, well, you have to put an application in. And then we put an application in and it goes like it does go into the abyss. So I'm like, Max, you have to go back and you have to go talk to these people because you have to have an in. And if you have an application in, you have to find an advocate, somebody who's going to say, hey, I talked to this really bright kid, and can somebody search his application up so that we can advance the process? And I do think that we're in an era now where, to your point, Grace, as laughable as it may be, one of the more unforgettable stories that I have in my little memory is when I worked at AECOM, I had gotten a note directly from one of our RBLLs, which is one of the big regional executives, about an intern level individual who went to Howard University, was a really bright electrical engineer. And the reason why this executive was forwarding his information to me is because this young man worked really hard to network his way towards this executive leader, had no through lines, and did through every channel, found his way to this executive's inbox. And this executive was so impressed. He said, we need to find a place for this person in our organization. And we did. And I know that it can feel like moving a mountain, but personal communication is reciprocal. That cynicism is on both sides of the table, right? So, whether it's the younger generation or the applicant saying, how do I know this place is for me? Alternatively, there are a lot of leaders on the other side of the table saying, are you the right person for my team or my organization? And that is impossible to determine or discern from an online application or resume. It comes down to interpersonal experience, exchange, and interaction. And when you show ambition or interest, that makes a difference. It may be discouraging, but if I have like a call to action or a word of advice to anybody, keep going, right? Wherever you're meant to land, like if you're putting the effort in to work your way in, your interest will be heard at some point if you put the work in to find your voice there, right? It is tough, but it's not impossible, and it does make a big difference. So call that CEO. Might get his assistant, you might get a nowhere, but call the CEO. Google it. Google his phone number. It's probably out there somewhere.
I love that.
I'm so proud to introduce Mannington Commercial and Cindy Coffin as a Season 10 sponsor of Design Nerds Anonymous. Mannington and Cindy herself have been alongside me, not only in the research, but also in the writing of this book.
Mannington Commercial has been a longtime sponsor of DNA. And one of the reasons I'm so proud of that is because DNA is the voice of our industry.
I'm so thrilled that you've been a partner for so long on DNA. What are the changes that you think people are struggling to solve?
It's a tough time to be a designer because you're dealing with a lot of information, but the responsibility lies on the shoulders of our industry for a great deal of what our future as a civilization looks like.
What is Mannington Commercial doing to really address some of these challenges?
We are committed to being fully transparent with everything that we do and the way that we do it. So that transparency really supports designers having access to all of the information that they need to make the right decisions clearly and plainly and transparently as possible.
If you could invite our podcast listeners, what would you say to them?
I think human beings are the differentiator. So I invite you to connect with a Mannington Commercial rep to learn more, not just about our new products, but how we think and how we show up for you as your design partner.
We're looking at generations and the different perceptions as clues. But as we're hearing in this conversation, it kind of affects everyone. And I think the difference is the context that, maybe Megan and I, because of our experience, understand how this could look different. But Grace, I love the way that you've kind of asked this, right? Because, we know from the stats, like there's double the number of clients and half the face time for sales reps today. There's double the number of applicants, but less than half of the face time to really get that, even at the Jewel, trying to apply for a job. You've got AI weeding out a high schooler's application. Like, what the heck is a high schooler supposed to put on their app to get in there?
Experience?
Exactly.
Right.
What exactly are you looking for? Right. So I think it's really about, some things that haven't changed are that human to human element and working that personalization. And I think people are looking for that grittiness to say, no, you're the one for me. It's almost like the dating realm. Like, are you going to give up too quick? Are you really coming after me because I'm the one that you want?
I will say there's a lot that's discouraging about the current job hunt state of affairs, but I think one good thing that has emerged is the LinkedIn People I Know feature. I've seen that really work for people in terms of just reaching out directly to somebody else from your college or something that works at that company, and then just scheduling a conversation with them first before you ever even submit your application or move forward with a company. I've seen that strategy work for quite a few people in my circle.
We have a ton of tangible ideas for companies to try. Grace, I love that you went to kind of the individuals. What are some ideas that you'd add to the list given the cynicism we're seeing across the board, Megan?
Forget perfection, right? I think a lot of people, especially the younger generations, it can be really intimidating to reach out to senior leaders or Grace, I love the example of like the who do you know. I last year led a senior studio session at Columbia in Chicago, just all around this whole subject about like, what are the sweaty armpit moments in your job search as a new grad? Like, what is scaring the daylights out of you, right?
So visual.
It's so real.
And a lot of it was just this intimidation around, I don't know this person well enough to ask for a favor. And it's like, if you only knew how many conversations I have with hiring managers who are like, where are the talented kids? Where are the next generation? How do I find them? How do I get access to them? We are coming up to 6-digit shortages, like 100,000. We're already at 80,000. It's going to be over 100. It already is in some disciplines, shortages of professionals. Just shoot your shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to know that person well or have interacted. Just reach out and talk about yourself and say, hey, I'm really interested in this opportunity. And I know you work there. Like, what is it like? How can I get my, name in the ring? And I think a lot of young people do get too hung up on like, well, I don't have enough of my internships, or that my degree is in electronics engineering. It's not electrical engineering, or it's in this side of design, or just start networking, right? It's more about like, what action can you take to build your network, especially as a younger professional? People want and strongly desire to talk to you.
I would agree with that like, where are all the good people, like all these hiring managers trying to find this young talent. I'll say I just spoke at a design school. It was a virtual classroom of 35 people. And I'm a big LinkedIner, Grace. Love LinkedIn. It's how I built my business on a free LinkedIn page mostly until recently. And I say to all these students, like, hey, I've got a massive LinkedIn network in specifically the design community. Feel free to connect with me. When you're ready, let me know how I can help you. Out of 35 kids, can you guess how many of them actually took me up on, like literally I put the link in the chat. Can you guess out of 35 how many did it?
Oh, 5?
4 of them did it. So, I think that there is a low bar to stand out in some ways. And if people take that opportunity. Grace, what would you add? Any other tangible pieces of advice, things to try, something from the book or something you'd add?
The LinkedIn tip is my top one. But another point that I read a founder give in an article to Fast Company, I'm blanking on who specifically it was, but was that they specifically looked for a candidate to show a little bit of vulnerability in interviews. And that's something I've seen specifically in the cover letters that I've read for people who have been accepted to really prestigious jobs in the media industry, is throwing in some color and personality, just because recruiters are seeing, like you said, Megan, thousands of these applications. And in that initial cover letter, you can really stand out by showing that you're a person and, God forbid, not an AI bot. And also just in that interview process, this founder mentioned, like, share a personal anecdote, share something vulnerable, a challenge that you had that you overcame. And yeah, I think that would make an impact on me too, as someone who's more used to this very transparent and frank way of communicating on the internet. It feels like that makes it feel like you're speaking to a real person and not just, what that recruiter might be looking for embodied.
What is one way that these chapters challenged you maybe to think differently, or maybe one idea that came from the book or that the book spurred that maybe is unrelated that will carry forward into your work?
One thing that just jumped out to me on a personal level is the fact that Gen Z is looking for upskilling opportunities at their current jobs, because that's kind of a generational thing, I think, in terms of really wanting to find new skills, but also younger employees are statistically more likely to engage in job hopping, which I'm sure most people know, but it's just changing your job frequently. I know one person that Amanda talked to noted that they had been at their job for 4 years and said, oh, it's been so long. Like, basically, I'm so old because I've been here for 4 years. But nowadays, that is kind of a common idea. So I think the note about upskilling at a current job was interesting to me, because I feel like my generation has a tendency to seek opportunities like that, but also because we've grown up finding a lot of information independently, like learning things on YouTube, just Google searching instead of asking a professor or an employer a question. It can be kind of hard to feel like you can just directly ask about that. So I think that was a good reminder for me personally to not feel afraid to ask directly about specific things that I want to learn or skills that I want to gain on the job.
And that was the concept that, ironically, if companies upskill their current staff for the next job, it will make them want to stay, which feels a little bit counterintuitive. And we get into this a little bit. There's another chapter on learning, and we get into this a little bit on learning as well. It's something that anecdotally, not in our research, that I've noticed that my generation, Gen X, were like, well, the company hasn't trained me on that. Versus a lot of these tech-enabled younger generations are like Googling it. They're finding a YouTube video that shows them how, because they're accustomed to doing that first and then asking a human, because I don't want to look stupid like I didn't do my homework, where my generation naturally assumes, like, I have to be reminded, like, Google it first, Amanda. Like, my poor IT department is like, oh, good Lord, she's calling again.
Did you Google?
Yeah, it's kind of a difference in perception there. So I think that this idea of upskilling them for the next, and that training's not an event, it's going to be kind of more of this ongoing access thing, is another concept there. Megan, what were you going to add?
Tying it back to like intentionality, but also the cynicism thing, is when I coach some of the younger generations in their job search, I think about, just like there's really crappy boilerplate job descriptions, there's also really crappy resume templates, right? So I loved what you were saying, Grace, about the point that you elevated around personalization and like injecting character. I tell people, like, articulate what it is that you're confident in right now. And a way to be vulnerable is to say what you want to learn. Here's what I here's what I want to learn. Here's what I hope my next chapter offers me, right? That can be completely agnostic of like, I want to work at this company, or I want to play this role, or I think that helps hiring managers also understand like what your next 12 to 24 months could look like, right? Does this person want to learn what I need them to in this role? Can I teach this person? Do they have the foundational skill sets today? Those are questions that will accelerate your application to the front of the pile. If a good hiring manager or a TA person understands what they're looking for and you're putting that out there, right? It could also, in a pretty effective way, eliminate you from the pile in a search that you don't make sense for, right? So like all those roles where you're thinking, I'm reading this job description and I'm confused about why I never hear back. Like a lot of times it's because that job description is crappy and you don't really understand the job that you're applying for. I think it can help mitigate some of that. So be vulnerable and put it out there, the things that you want to learn. I think sometimes people get too caught up in perfection and like, well, I didn't learn this, or I should be further. Comparison is the thief of all joy. I know it's cliche, but it's the same in your job search, right? If you sit and compare yourself to like, am I good enough? My alumni over here has this experience from this internship, or I didn't learn this yet. Not every internship or opportunity is equal. That's why people move around. And that's why there is so much agility in the market now. And it's creating competitiveness between hiring managers. People stay where they grow. And if they're not growing, they're leaving. So it's this duality of like, can this hiring manager offer it to you? But it's also not being afraid to say, here's what I know and what I'm confident in today. And here's what I really want to learn, right? That can accelerate that alignment and that match in a pretty powerful way.
Yeah, I love that. And that point about if they're not growing, they're leaving, I think that is one main theme that causes maybe older generations to view Gen Z as less loyal. Like Gen Z doesn't have as much of this attitude about, earning a promotion by staying for 20 years or waiting to learn a new skill until they reach the next position. And I think just something that's important to remember is that a big reason, obviously, it's these different generational mindsets a bit that play into that, but also just the financial reality for younger people is that, if the job is not matching up to what they expected, and if they aren't able to learn and grow and, move up as they hope to, they're going to have to move because, the cost of living is crazy right now. And so I think that a lot of Gen Zers aren't leaving because they aren't loyal, but because, financially they might have to find a new opportunity that works better for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One more thing I want to add is, define growth. That's a really big problematic word in this multi-generational, environment that we're in. Growth historically for some of the older generations looks very linear, right? Gone are the days. We're talking Candyland now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Up, down, all around.
I think you're thinking of Chutes and Ladders,
Chutes
right?
and ladders. That's, you got it. You're in my brain. Chutes and ladders. Defining what growth means to you is also really important. Sometimes lateral growth is just as important as forward or upward.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody wants, I just had this conversation with the CEO. Not everybody wants to be in a principal seat. Not everybody wants to be in a revenue generating role.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody aspires to that corporate climb. So as a hiring manager, make sure you're understanding how that person
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of the table defines that and what their ambition looks like. But also don't be afraid to articulate that. Again, as a job seeker, the more that you're very transparent about what you want and what your goals are and how you want to grow, the more opportunity you have to end up in the right seat where those opportunities that you really want are going to align. Because it's okay to say no. It's okay to say this isn't for me. And I think people are sometimes scared to do that.
I agree. And Megan, I would actually flip that to the company level too. We're talking a lot here to the individual, but I think that it's really flipping that to company to say, how do you want them to grow? How do you want this to go? And being a little clearer with that. Again, one of the things I hope to do with this book is help people that want to understand what's shifting, understand it. They may not like it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to want to change, but it will help you maybe see things from another perspective. Megan, was there anything in these chapters that made you think a little bit differently or something that you're going to carry forward in your work that maybe was not on your radar before?
Not something that I would do differently, but something that challenged the way that I think about this and is continuing to be a conversation that I'm having with leaders is there is one section in which you mention the infinite options. And I think I'm still challenging myself in that train of thought. I think that as we introduce AI and AI accelerates the way we build and we design and we evolve as an industry, we'll have more options, but I don't think there's infinite ones. I think that there are infinite options in the universe, right, of industries, opportunities. But I think the challenge that as a consultant is making me think is how do we help teach organizations how to think about intentionality in the opportunities that they're creating? An engagement conclude with a firm in the Bay Area that was really interesting. And they're a really established firm and they're multi-generational. And the CEO just straight up said, the next generation doesn't want all this that we've done. And I was like, why do you say that? Like, absolutely disagree with you. And he was talking about these pathways, right? And the options and what he sees and this disconnect and feeling like there's a desire there or a lack of desire or whatever. And I think it just comes back to like, how intentional are you around clarity about those options that are able to be created or the voice that you can give your organization? We talk about innovation in terms of the products in which we're delivering, but why aren't we talking about innovating the ways that we're designing our own organizations? We have to be doing that. Don't let your creativity stop when it comes to designing your firm and your organization and the ways you grow. You have to deliver in the same way for yourself as your own client as you do for the ones that you're delivering physical buildings or products to. This is the challenge that's going to keep getting me out of bed.
I would say as we look at this topic of recruitment and retention, especially in this industry, try and find someone with that 5 to 15 years of experience. It's really, really tough. And the firms and the businesses and the clients that put that focus there, I think are going to be the ones that stand out. Again, we've talked a lot about individuals standing out, but how do these companies stand out to the individuals?
As the home of NeoCon for decades, The MART was built on the power of physical presence. You came to Chicago, you walked the floors, you experienced it in person. That foundation still matters, perhaps now more than ever. But we've also taken to heart the reality that how people engage has changed. ThinkLab's data shows that one of the things professionals value most at NeoCon is CEU education. Today, many more designers are accessing that content through our digital platform, dramatically expanding reach while strengthening the in-person experience. That shift wasn't about replacing what worked. It was about building upon it. We believe that leadership in this industry means the willingness to rethink, to evolve, and to serve our communities in new ways. For NeoCon 2026, we've introduced several new product offerings, including Illuminated NeoCon, a show within a show featuring design-focused architectural and decorative lighting, and the NeoCon Collab, a curated, multi-brand environment that will create an elevated, inspirational experience in our 7th floor exhibit hall. And we're proud to continue shaping what's next, together.
This season of Design Nerds Anonymous is supported by the MAV Group, an executive search and coaching firm in the design and furniture industry. I have personally seen how deeply they understand this community. Today, I'm joined by Angela Burke, CEO of the MAV Group. Angela, what are you hearing right now?
Well, the industry isn't just changing, it's changing hands. And leadership development cannot be an afterthought. Across firms, manufacturers, and dealerships, seasoned leaders are planning for what's next, while emerging leaders are stepping into significant roles faster than ever before. Creative excellence doesn't automatically translate to leadership excellence. So here at the MAV Group, we help organizations hire exceptional leaders and coach them to drive lasting impact. Because what's next for this industry isn't only about design, it's about leadership.
Learn more at themavgroup.com. The MAV Group, leaders for what's next. Given the discussion we've had today, we started with intentionality and cynicism. How would we shift that word? What could this recruiting, retention, loyalty of the future look like if we get this right?
My main hope for the shift from cynicism would be transparency. I think that's the main trust gap that I see here is that lack of transparency. And I think if we make some of the changes that we talked about today, we can get closer to an application process where on both sides it feels more like a transparent conversation and not just that abyss that we've referenced. If we can fix for that, I think applicants will feel a lot more empowered to be themselves and come back to companies and try again, like you mentioned, Megan. So that's my hope for the future.
I think what I would add, shifting from intentionality into the 2050 version, if we get it right, would be cultivation. Intentionality creates momentum and velocity. And once you have momentum and velocity, you just have to keep cultivating it, right? Like I grew up in a family full of farmers. You can't grow a garden without planning and putting the right seeds and understanding the climate in which what you're trying to grow will flourish. Once you have that established, then it's just continued cultivation, right? Then it's just continuing to build on what you're growing, surprising outcomes that you didn't expect. And you can just learn from that and keep cultivating. And I think if we can move into a state of cultivation, there's a ton of hopefulness. There's a ton of good happening. There is a ton of really awesome organizations that are getting this right and have gotten this right and will continue to do well. When you look at them, it's cultivation. They look at their organization and they put people, they're putting people in roles that, check 6 or 7 out of 10 boxes and letting them grow and placing smart bets and mitigating risk that way. So I think cultivation is where I hope we're more firmly planted at as an industry in 2050.
I love that. What a great way to end. Wow. I don't know about you, but I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. So thanks again to Grace and Megan for such a thoughtful and honest conversation. And some of my favorite moments were when Grace started asking questions to the two of us that are a little bit more seasoned, which I think is a really healthy lived example of what I hope this book sparks. So next week, we're going to zoom out even further into culture and purpose, two quite weighty topics that are definitely relevant to what we're exploring in the book. I'll be joined by Ron Tite. He's a creative director, comedian, best-selling author, and founder of Church and State. In his role, he constantly challenges leaders to stop treating purpose like a tagline and start treating it as a decision-making filter. So if recruitment and retention, today's episode was about who joins and who stays, culture and purpose, next week's episode focuses on why they care in the first place. So again, if anything we talked about today sparked ideas for your team or how you can interact with your clients, you'll find links in the show notes to pre-order the book, Work for What's Next. And if you want a way to bring these conversations into your showroom, your leadership retreat, or something around your broader client interaction strategy, we'd love to explore bulk orders, maybe a keynote or workshop. We've got more information on the ThinkLab website, which is also linked in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you'll join again next week. Design Nerds Anonymous is a proud member of the Surround Podcast Network. Special thanks to our podcast production team, Rachel Senator and Rob Schulte.